I'm Alan Miller, the founder and CEO of the News Literacy Project. I'm delighted to be here with you at the National Council for the Social Studies Annual Conference in Austin with a special guest. The News Literacy Project works with teachers across disciplines and provides curriculum and resources to help teach students how to know what news and information to trust. So I'm joined, by the way, you can be submitting questions for us through our Facebook page, and if we have time, we will try to get to them later. So I am delighted to be joined by Marty Baron, the executive editor of the Washington Post, and one of the truly great newspaper editors in America today. During Marty's tenure at the Post, the paper has won 9 Pulitzer Prizes and regained its status as one of the nation's leading news organizations. Marty has received numerous honors, most recently the International Center for Journalists Founders Award for Excellence in Journalism, and we're delighted to have him with us. On a personal note, I'm proud to say that Marty and I were colleagues long ago at the Los Angeles Times, and he has been supportive of the News Literacy Project right from the start. Marty, I want to begin by mentioning something that veteran New York Times reporter Carl Hulse said yesterday in an NCSS session, that he believes that journalism is more important today than at any time in his career. Do you agree?
It's hard to make comparisons, but I think it's extremely important today. I think people need an institution that has as its mission of getting at the facts. I think that there is so much information or supposed information coming from so many different sources that people have a hard time distinguishing fact from fiction. And our job is to get the facts. And so I think an institution like that is incredibly important. I also think it's important that we always, in any democracy, have an institution that acts as a check on power, a check on particularly government power. And that's our role. That's how it's defined under the First Amendment of the Constitution. That's why we have a First Amendment. We're in a profession that's certainly being challenged in many ways right now, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I think that this institution is incredibly important at this moment in history.
So you mentioned getting the facts. How do you respond to those who say we're now in a post-truth era? Does truth still matter?
Well, it certainly matters. The fact is, we can't have a democracy without a baseline set of facts. The notion of a democracy is that we debate policies, we debate our analysis of the problems that we face as a society, we debate the prescriptions for solving those problems, and we should have that debate. It should be incredibly vigorous debate. But we have to start with a baseline set of facts. If we can't agree on what happened yesterday, how are we going to actually have a democracy? How do you build a democracy out of that? Then people only believe that which is good for their, let's say, their political tribe. If it's good for their political tribe, it's true. If it's bad for their political tribe, they view it as not true. They may believe only who actually holds power, or who has the largest megaphone, or what conforms with their own opinion. But in fact, we have to have a baseline set of facts. Otherwise, I'm not sure that democracy is going to work.
So let me ask you about, in that regard, a challenge that journalism faces today, which is the decline of public trust and the ideological polarization about which news organizations particular people tend to trust. What can journalists do to regain that trust and begin to bridge that divide?
Well, I think there are a number of things that we can do, but on that subject, I think it's important to think of something. When there's a natural disaster that we're faced with, when people are about to confront a hurricane, or when they're dealing with floods, or they're dealing with mudslides, or they're dealing with fires, the instinct that most people have is a correct instinct, and that is they turn to the long-established journalistic institutions that they've relied on for a long time. That means that they actually have an instinctive trust in those institutions. Because they know that those are the institutions that are going to provide them with the information that they need to get through a crisis at that moment. They don't just go to whoever happened to send them an email. They don't just go to some internet website that they never heard of before, and they have no idea what kinds of journalistic resources they have. Where they have no idea what the expertise of that of those individuals are. They go to the mainstream news organizations. As to what we can do, I don't guarantee results. but I think there are some things that we can do. The first is talk a bit more about who we are. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about who works in the journalism profession. There's often the misconception that we all come from the so-called elite schools, that we all grew up on the coast, that we all have the same political views, that we all have the same life experiences, and that's not true at all. Certainly in our newsroom, we have people who have been veterans, have seen combat in Afghanistan and Iraq. We have people who grew up on farms. Our deputy national editor grew up on a farm in western Pennsylvania. One of our top White House reporters grew up on a corn farm in South Carolina. We have people who've gone to evangelical schools, and people who grew up, we have one in particular who grew up in a homeschooled environment, one of 12 kids. So we have people from a lot of different environments in our newsroom, and we like that. And I think we should talk a bit more about that. The second thing that I think we should do is talk more about how we go about our work. There's some general mystery and a lot of myths about how journalists go about their work. And I think that we need to show more of that work. When we're describing a court case, we should show the depositions if we can. We should show the filing, all the filings that we possibly can. We should include recordings, audio recordings and video recordings, any primary source information that we possibly can to buttress the work that we have. And I think that's incredibly important. And probably the most important thing that we can do is to write about people in every corner of this country, to show that their lives are reflected in the work that we do. We just did a series by one of our most outstanding reporters and writers, Eli Saslow, about the sorry condition of rural health in this country. And he spent a lot of time in very remote areas of this country where people are really struggling with getting basic health care and certainly emergency health care. And where there, in many instances, there are no doctors. So there are no doctors for 100 miles. And I think it's important that we do stories like that and show that we understand the concerns of people in every part of this country, and that we also reflect their aspirations. And that's something that we're very much dedicated to doing, and I think that's something that as a profession we should make sure that we are doing on a consistent basis.
So students are also struggling with what news and information to trust, particularly on social media. A new study by the Stanford History Education Group found renewed evidence that a large majority of students are not well prepared to investigate sources of information for their accuracy, relevance, and quality. What's the answer to this challenge with the next generation?
Well, I should say the News Literacy Project is the answer, actually, or something like it. I think people need some training in how to distinguish fact from fiction. What are the tools that they ought to be using? How should they be thinking about it? What is the critical thinking process behind this? And I think that's really important. Distinguishing opinion from fact, distinguishing, what is a reliable source of information? What has a history of reliability? Which institutions actually have resources to check out information? I mean, we in our own newsroom, we have 850 journalists in our newsroom. We don't need to have 850 journalists if we're making stuff up, I can assure you of that. We wouldn't have to pay those salaries. We pay those salaries. We have hired those people because we put so much time and effort into checking things out. We have reporters covering a variety of subject areas. We have reporters who are covering every territory of this country. We have people all around the world, people who put themselves into conflict zones, who put their lives, whose lives are in danger for doing that kind of work. And nobody does that out of any that kind of work because they are trying to promote an ideology. They do that because they think it's important that the American public know what's happening around the country and around the world. And so I think it's important that students at pretty much every level these days be made aware of what are the tools that they need in order to sort out the information that they're receiving, because they're being bombarded with information from all sorts of sources, many of them unreliable.
So let me ask you about something that many people take for granted, which is press freedom. The U.S. now ranks 48th in the world, down from the top 20 in 2002. We've fallen 16 places since 2013. How did we fall so far during this time?
Well, probably because we have a political environment in which the press has come under attack. Certainly, the president has attacked the press as scum, as garbage, as enemies of the people, traitors to the country, you name it. He seems to have an endless reservoir of names to pin on us. And he started that during the campaign in 2016 and kept it up, and has certainly kept it up in his position as president. And so I think that has helped erode confidence in the press, and also represents in and of itself a threat to the press. The objective here is to disqualify the press as an independent arbiter of fact. And not just to disqualify the press as an independent arbiter of fact, but to disqualify any independent arbiter of fact. So to attempt to disqualify the courts as an independent arbiter of fact, to disqualify law enforcement in the form of the FBI, for example, as an independent arbiter of fact, to disqualify intelligence agencies as arbiters of fact, to disqualify historians and their account of history as arbiters of fact, and to disqualify even scientists as arbiters of fact, so that people believe him 100% of the time, and that's what he would like, and so that in itself represents a threat, and I think that's very concerning. This is a country ours is a country that used to be a model for press freedom, obviously because of the First Amendment that we have in this country, which provides for a free press, but not only a free press, but free expression and all sorts of other freedoms, freedom of religion, freedom to petition the government, freedom of assembly, a whole range of freedoms, all of which are supposed to act as a check on government power and power generally. And so, and we have stood as a model to the rest of the world. Unfortunately now, we are not advocating much for free expression and a free press around the world. And many statements have emanated from government which suggest that there's sympathy for authoritarian regimes elsewhere. And that's deeply concerning. What you see in any country that's moving toward authoritarianism around the world is that the first thing they try to do, these government officials try to do, is to suppress a free press. And that represents a threat against free expression everywhere, of every type. I think it's important to think about what that free expression really is, and that free expression includes, your ability to watch the movies you'd like to watch, the ability to listen to the music you'd like to watch, with whatever message that music carries, the ability to have conversations with your friends and colleagues about whatever subject you would like, a whole range of freedoms that involve expression. And sadly, our government has not been a great advocate for free expression and for free press around the world.
Why do you think it's important the public in general and educators in particular care about the fact that the press is under attack?
Well, I think generally for the reasons that I was talking about, I think fundamental, frankly, to human dignity is that people be able to express their views and to be able to express themselves in a variety of ways. So certainly in their conversations, through their art, through their music, whatever it might be. And so if there's a threat against the press, it represents a threat against free expression generally. If we wish to have a democracy, we're going to have a free press. The reality is that there never has been a democracy without a free press. And the first thing that happens in countries that wish to annihilate democracies is they try to annihilate a free press. And so if we believe in democracy, if we believe that central to human dignity is the ability to express yourself freely, then I think we as a society should care about this subject.
Let me ask you about something you said in your acceptance speech at the International Center for Journalists event. You focused on how journalists today can serve future generations of journalists as well as their predecessors and the way the predecessors have served them. You said there could be no better way to meet that obligation than to practice every day rigorous, independent journalism that holds power to account, faithful to facts, dedicated to truth, fearless in spirit, and unshakably committed to our mission in a democracy. Why is it so vital that journalists adhere to those standards in that mission?
I think that that's what we're called upon to do. That's why we have a free press. You know, when the First Amendment was crafted by James Madison, he talked about freely examining public characters and measures, the necessity of doing that. And the idea was that there should be an independent check on power. This was not a country born of a reverence for power. This was a country born of the notion that power can get out of hand. And one of the things that the founders were trying to do was to make sure that there were a variety of checks on that power. That's why they created these various branches, 3 branches of government, as one would act as a check on the other. And then they wanted an independent check on all of them, and that's why they provided for a free press in the First Amendment. So that is our mission. That is why we exist. If we don't do that, if we don't fulfill that mission, if we have rights and don't exercise them, then those rights are actually meaningless. We only add meaning by actually exercising those rights. And so if we don't have a free press that fulfills its mission, then we cede to powerful interests, including the government, essentially total power, including the power to tell us what's true and false. And that's something that we, over history, have rejected in this country.
You are immersed in covering, obviously, the impeachment hearings. Talk a little bit about the challenges and the opportunities you've seen, given how historic this process is.
Well, you know, I mean, the challenge, of course, is getting at the facts. I mean, first of all, this happened within the secrecy of the White House initially, and within diplomatic circles. The conversation that became the spark that launched these impeachment hearings, the conversation between President Trump and the leader of Ukraine, was obviously that was a conversation, the transcript of which was put into a very secure place, a secure server, especially a secure server. And so just learning about them, obtaining the information that was in the whistleblower's complaint, obtaining sort of the primary information about that conversation, understanding that it related to an interaction between the president and a foreign leader is a challenge. And then, of course, you know, you have a government, you have people who work in government, people who are government professionals whose jobs depend on essentially the good graces of political interests who are in power. And so getting them to talk can be extremely difficult. And so there are challenges all along the way. In addition, we face challenges from a White House that continually attacks us, tries to attack our credibility, suggests that we're just only doing this as a member of the so-called, that we're part of the opposition party, when in fact our motive is really to get out the facts. People should know what their president is doing, and that's our objective, is to try to tell people what their president is doing.
So let me ask you about the other big story that you're covering now, which is the 2020 campaign. So you've actually acknowledged that journalists were slow to pick up on the level of anger and alienation among the American heartland that helped fuel President Trump's rise in 2016. What are you in the Post doing differently now to be more in touch with such voters as this campaign unfolds?
Well, we've been doing this really since the beginning of this administration, and we're doing it throughout the campaign as well, throughout the 2016 campaign. Is make sure that we're getting out of the country and talking to everybody. You know, this is an incredibly diverse country. People with a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different experiences, a lot of different life circumstances. You know, we're here in Austin. The people who live in Austin and Texas, various parts of Texas, they're different even within Texas. The experiences are different, and certainly in different parts of the country, people have different experiences. It's important that we as a journalistic institution just get out of the country, spend time with people, not just parachute in and then take off, but spend time with people to take the measure of what people are concerned about, to take the measure of what their hopes are. And so we have a team called the America Team on our national staff, and their job is to do exactly that, and to do it full time, and to spend time in various parts of the country. In fact, we just set up a bureau in Kansas City with somebody who actually grew up in that area. And the reason that we positioned it in Kansas City is because we didn't want it to be in, let's say, a place that's like, let's say, Chicago or Denver, that's too much like a lot of other cosmopolitan areas. And so we wanted that person to be spending time in the rural parts of this country. And that's what she's been doing. She's been spending a lot of time looking at the struggles of farmers right now. And so paying attention to the whole country and every corner of this country is what we are endeavoring to do. And that's something that we're very much committed to.
And how do you feel overall the news media is doing thus far in terms of coverage of the campaign? Have you seen a real difference from 3-4 years ago?
Yeah, I think, well, I don't know. It's hard. I haven't actually studied how different it is this time from the past. I do think people are sensitive to that. They're sensitive to any preconceptions that they may have about how things might turn out. People are understandably skittish about forecasting how things are going to unfold. It's very hard to know. Things can change very quickly, and there are factors that we may not be aware of. So I think people are trying to be more open-minded about how the dynamics of the electorate will play out over the course of the next year.
So we're ready to take some questions from our viewers. Okay, we're awaiting questions from our viewers. Let me ask you a question about your now very long and distinguished career, not just at the Post, but previously at the Boston Globe and the New York Times and the Herald and Los Angeles Times. When you look back at this point, what is it that you're most proud of?
I guess I'm most proud of the investigative reporting that's been done, particularly in Boston, where we did an investigation of the Catholic Church. When I got there was a case that was in the courts that involved a priest by the name of John Gagan, who had been accused of abusing as many as 80 kids. And the lawyer for the plaintiffs had alleged that the cardinal was aware of that abuse and yet continually reassigned that priest from parish to parish, where he abused again and again. And the church said that those were baseless charges, that they were irresponsible allegations. And when I started, the question was, well, okay, we have two assertions here. One is that there's incredible wrongdoing, including all the way up to the cardinal, and the church saying that these are just irresponsible charges. How do we get at the truth? And that's the question. It's a simple question that we always ask in journalism, is how do we get at the truth? And what do we have to do? And so we took two tracks. One was to go to court to try to unseal internal church documents that would help us reveal the truth, to show how, in fact, the church had dealt with that case as well as other cases like it. And then we launched a journalistic investigation, and we did both of those at the same time. And 6 months later, we published the first of our stories, and over time we probably published 900 stories. And we were able to reveal the truth. And the truth was that the cardinal, in fact, was aware of the abuse by that particular priest, and did, in fact, reassign him from parish to parish, knowing full well that he was an abuser, and reassign him without telling anybody, without telling the parish priest, without telling the parishioners, without telling the community at large. And the other truth was that this wasn't the only case. In fact, there were dozens and dozens of other cases like this, and that there had been a pattern and practice of cover-up within the archdiocese. And then there was a bigger truth even than that, and that is that the Boston Archdiocese wasn't the only one. That this had happened throughout the country, and this had happened throughout the world, and was an ongoing policy and practice of the church. And so, to me, that makes the case very powerfully that that journalists have an obligation to pursue wrongdoing when they hear evidence of it, that they have an obligation to listen to people who have not been listened to before, in this case the survivors of abuse, who had not been closely listened to until that point. And that we have so we have an obligation to pursue those kinds of stories and to expose wrongdoing wherever we might find it, regardless of the kinds of pressures that may be brought to bear against us.
So of course that coverage was captured, courageous and incredibly important coverage in the movie. They were categorized in the movie Spotlight. How accurate was Spotlight in reflecting your experience?
Well, it was pretty accurate. I mean, the director and he was also a writer and his co-writer. They spent a lot of time doing a lot of research. They looked at every court document. They interviewed all the journalists. They interviewed survivors. They interviewed lawyers who were involved. At every end, the church wouldn't talk to them, but they interviewed as many people as they possibly could. And I think the general evolution of our investigation was accurately portrayed in the movie. Now, there's creative license. I think it's important to remember that in any historical movie, there's creative license, that it is not a documentary. There's a reason they call one a movie and they call the other one a documentary. And so, in a 2-hour movie, you have to do a lot of compression, and you create a bit of a drama, and things that we thought were very prosaic and boring at the time, they looked incredibly exciting in a movie. So, but generally, the evolution of that investigation is quite accurately portrayed in the movie.
Let me ask you the flip side of the question in terms of your career. Is there something, a story, incident that you wish you could do differently, that you regret the handling of in any way?
Sure, there are plenty of them. I'm not sure I want to get into all of them. I mean, I think, one of the stories that I was in charge of was when I was the editor of the Miami Herald. We had the Elian Gonzalez case. That was the Cuban boy who was picked up at sea. His mother died at sea. His mother was trying to get him out of Cuba and bring him here to the United States. And it became a huge controversy because his relatives in Miami were trying to keep him in Miami, and other people felt that, particularly the non-Cuban population, felt that he should be returned to his father, who was still in Cuba. And it exploded as a community issue. I think there was, one thing that we could have done is just spend more time with the Cuban American community, kind of better portray what their perspective was on that. And I think there was a feeling, certainly within the Cuban American community, that this was as if a boy had been sent over the Berlin Wall, and that people were asking for the boy to be sent back. And agree or disagree with that position, and there's certainly room for plenty of disagreement. That was their perspective, is that they were feeling that this mother had taken this risk in order to provide for freedom for her kid, and to betray her wishes by returning him to Cuba, even to his father, would have been a grave offense. There are other arguments contrary to that, of course. Pretty powerful arguments as well, is that a boy belongs to a parent. And that's a pretty simple and powerful argument. And I think we probably could have done a better job of just diving more deeply into that whole area.
So we have a question from a viewer, from Phyllis, asking, what is the commitment of the Post to hiring mature journalists with a wealth of experience who can provide context to coverage?
Well, the commitment is total. We're certainly not going to hire somebody who's immature, that's for sure. Let me tell you a little bit about our hiring process. Anybody that gets hired at the Post is interviewed by all of the senior editors at the Post, including myself. So we have 4 of the most senior editors, and we are all interviewing candidates. And a typical candidate goes through perhaps 8 to 12 interviews just coming into our news organization. In addition to that, we do a vetting process. So we vet all the candidates. We talk to references, and we talk to other people who know them. We do social media scrubs and things like that. So, and we are hiring people who have experience, and people who show promise. And so that is our objective, is to hire mature people who have experience, who have good judgment. And of course we have standards that we endeavor to enforce on a regular basis as well. Like We make mistakes because we're human, like people in any other profession, but we try to enforce our standards on a very consistent basis.
So for another viewer, I want to ask about how Jeff Bezos' ownership of the paper has impacted things overall, and maybe you can talk a little bit about some ways that it hasn't affected things.
Okay, I'll talk about the latter first. Sometimes there's an assumption, particularly on the part of the President of the United States, that he is somehow running our news coverage. He is not. He does not get involved in it at all. He's never suggested a story. He's never suppressed a story. He's never critiqued a story. He's never criticized a story. He does not get involved at all in our news coverage. He doesn't make any news decisions whatsoever. Of course, he has to approve our overall budget. It is his company. He owns 100% of it. And we'd like to make a case for the additional resources that we're seeking. But he doesn't get involved in assigning stories or editing stories or doing anything with regard to stories, frankly. So how has it affected us? He has a good sense of technology, and so technology has had a profound impact on our profession and our business. And so it's been very helpful to have someone like him understanding how we can navigate this new environment. He has a very sophisticated understanding of consumer behavior. He runs a consumer business and founded a consumer business, and so he's very sensitive to that. And we are a consumer business, so it helps. He also provided initial investment that we needed in order to make a transition from what was largely a print-oriented business to a largely digital-oriented business. And that required sort of an investment bridge, and he provided that investment bridge. From that first year commitment, we have been profitable, and which is great, and we now reinvest our profits entirely within our news organization because he doesn't really need dividends and isn't asking for them. He wants us to invest in that, and what he wants for us is to create a sustainable business model for the Post that will last for the long haul.
All right, so I want to thank Marty for a very engaging, thoughtful, and illuminating conversation. Thanks to all of our viewers for tuning in, and a reminder that you can see the entire Q&A on our Facebook page. Have a good afternoon.